So welcome everyone to this webinar. I just wanted to say hi. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Michelle. I'm the research coordinator here at the Beta Initiative, and I coordinate a lot of the CANOVI work alongside many others on this call. I'm calling in from Toronto, which is the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, Chippewa, Mississauga of the Credit, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabe, probably many other Indigenous groups. But, despite many of us being settlers on this land, I'm sure we're all very thankful and privileged to have the ability to live and work where we do and work with the land and the seeds that came before us, and just having gratitude towards the people, the Indigenous peoples and all others who took care of these resources for decades before, centuries before, so we could have it today. So while we talk about carrots today, I just want to keep these pillars of gratitude in mind as we engage with carrot breeding today so that we can continue to steward these varieties and seeds for generations to come. So that being said, I just wanted to introduce our topic of the day, which is everything in relation to carrots, their selection, and potentially setting up your carrots and your stecklings for seed production. I'm so happy to be joined by many carrot experts today, including Micalea Colley from Organic Seed Alliance, Dr. Phil Simon from University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as Weijia, Wang, and Chris Thoreau, who both work as part of the CANOVI project at the University of British Columbia. And so a quick schedule for today is that we're going to just be going over everything in relation to harvesting carrots and doing selections, and then we'll transition into talking a bit more in detail about CANOVI, and then open it up to a Q&A at the end of the webinar. Also, while the webinar is happening, if you have any questions or comments that you want to go back to further, just because we're a small group, you're welcome to just put it in the chat, and we can either talk about it then or towards the end of the presentation. So we're just going to go on to the next slide. Yeah, and just like a quick showcase before we start, I just wanted to highlight all the groups and people that are involved in CANOVI. Even though, you might see my name in your inbox, CANOVI is actually run and organized by various organizations as shown on the screen, but also all the wonderful growers we're able to work with. So yeah, we just wanted to highlight that. And just from here, I'm going to pass it off to Micalea, who's going to start talking about carrots.
Thank you. Thanks for the setup, Michelle, and it's nice to see everyone. So I am just going to share a little bit of the approach that we take to selecting carrots in the field from a practical level. While carrots take a while to breed because it's a biennial crop, we also have that advantage that we can grow a trial and select from it in the same year without crossing, and therefore be able to do genetic selection to move the population forward. And how you approach harvesting and selecting might depend on the scale that you're operating on. In our program, in collaboration with Dr. Simon's program, we grow out the roots for our seed cycle for the selection at a winter nursery in El Centro, California in the winter time. And in that way, we're able to harvest, ship the roots north, and then take them to seed. And if we're lucky, we can also get seed off of them that year to send back down so we can turn it into an annual cycle. So when we harvest, I put these slides in so you can see a little bit of the scale of operation that we're talking about harvesting, and some of our methods for getting the roots out of the field into a selection table might be a little bit different than you might take if you're actually on a working farm, and what might be most practical there. But we harvest somewhere around 2,000 plots. So all of those plots, we do a quick evaluation in the field. We might do a very quick also physical selection in the field to only bag and take back the best roots from each plot. And so that includes what we do, dig them up, lay them all out flat so that you can see the array of that variety, the whole spectrum of the roots. And then in the field, in a quick manner, we do a quick selection for, root quality as well as top quality, because then that field scale is where you have the opportunity to pay attention to the quality of the tops, not only of the whole plot to decide whether we want to save and move forward with that variety or not, but also the individual stecklings within the variety, doing the genetic selection of taking back those that have the optimum top quality. Go ahead, next slide. So from the field scale, we would take each of those plots, pick the best looking roots out of the plot, and then we bag them to bring them back to a table where we can cut them open, spend a little bit more time evaluating them in the field. It's not really ideal location for cutting and tasting and that sort of thing. So if I was on a farm, I might leave the tops on and just throw the whole thing in a bag and then take it back to the cutting table where I can again reassess the tops. But what we do in the field is we go ahead and everything we're going to take back for selection, we then top them. So to prepare a steckling for selection, getting rid of all that top, because that top material in the wintertime, if you threw it all in the bag and tried to store it that way, the tops would start to deteriorate and rot, and you're losing more evapotranspiration from that root through the top itself. So we cut the tops at about an inch, leaving about an inch of stem, maybe half an inch to an inch of the growing point, because you need that growing point for it to make a flower the following year. If you just topped them by cutting the top off all the way, there would be no growing point left for the seed cycle. And each of ours are then labeled before we bring them back, so we know what we're selecting later. Go ahead, next slide. So what you do then, and this is what we have practiced with the CANOVI project, the practice that they generally follow at UBC as well, is going back to a big table where now you can sit and have the time you need to deliberate over the quality of each of the roots in the population. And if you're maintaining a population that you really want to maintain as a variety, as opposed to a potential future breeding line, it's a good idea to try to save at least 50 roots out of that population, because carrots are subject to inbreeding depression if you narrow it down too narrowly within a given population. Sometimes we take back fewer roots if it's something that we're actually just trying to keep that line for a specific quality to be able to use it for breeding, where we'd be crossing with something in the future to reinvigorate that vigor or the hybridization. So what we do is lay them all out, as I said, and then go through a process of assessment. You can kind of go, I start with like a negative selection first and then go toward a positive selection, meaning taking out all the ugly stuff. So if I have them laid out on a table like this, as you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, I might walk through after evaluating the whole table as a whole. It's good to kind of get a photo of that whole table and say, what's the array of this population? What is sort of the overall quality of the population that I'm moving forward? But then when I'm ready to actually select the roots that I'm going to take for seed, then obviously I want the best qualities to be moved forward for the next generation. So at that point, I would go through a process of a visual assessment and quickly going across the table, throw aside, move aside anything that's got, really, an ugly texture or double tops coming out of the top of it, or rough shoulders, the smoothness of the root. Generally, we have selected toward a nonce type that has kind of a nice thick tip fill, but whatever the type of carrot your shape that you're going for, you want to kind of be evaluating that tip quality. And so then I would just do kind of like get the uglies off the table. So then you have less to sort of deliberate about. And then at that point, we would line them up and cut each root, often on a diagonal. I like it on a diagonal so you can really see the interior color and zoning of the root. And so you can see that in the middle slide here. When we do this, We don't throw the tips away. We keep the tips right there next to the top of the root. And at that phase, you're able to kind of look at that core quality. And depending on what you like or what you're going for, this is a red carrot, as you can see. If we're going for a red carrot that has a true dark red center, I would then at this point select out some of those that you can see in the slide that have more of that yellow core coming out of the center of it. And at that point, I would just kind of move them aside, pull them out of the lineup, out of the contenders that you have left to keep. I would also go through a more rigorous evaluation of all of those other qualities. You can see, if you look at the middle slide, the fourth root in, I can see from here that it's got some of those lateral roots growing out of the side of it. That's less ideal. So looking again, once again, at the quality of the shoulder of the root, the attachment of the top, is it very, what we call pinched, where it kind of comes in? That's not a very clean growing point, a place where you can get disease later. Are there any that have double tops coming out of the top? Smoothness of the surface of the root, any laterals coming off, and then again, looking again at that tip fill, you can see that that tip on the right hand side of the middle slide has a nice full filled out tip compared to some of the others in that lineup. So I might pull out some more of the roots, just again, based on those visual qualities. Once I've narrowed it down, keeping in mind, if I want as a seed production crop, I want to aim for that 50 roots to end with. So I might be more or less critical depending on what my end goal is of the population. And then at this phase, we actually physically taste every single root. And I can attest to the fact that Dr. Simon, every one of those 2,000 population, doesn't keep all 2,000, but we do taste every root that gets moved on to the next generation. And if you start tasting them and you say, wow, these are all by and large have a strong, not pleasant taste or texture, at that point, you might decide, I don't want to keep this population. I'm going to look at something better. But if this is one that I'm moving forward with, there will be differences in the taste of every single root by and large. So tasting each root kind of, and Phil, you can fill in here. I think of Phil as the consummate carrot taster, and I've learned a lot just by eating so many that I couldn't stand him anymore next to him. But you kind of are looking for some balance of sweetness, a little bit of aromatic. I don't mind if it's not overly pungent, but if you start to get a lot of like turpentine type flavors, it's not very desirable. And then also the texture. Does it have a nice crisp texture, or is it really dense or mealy? And so again, tasting every single root across the table. If I taste them that are not good, just take them off the table again, the negative selection. And if they taste pretty good, then I might move those roots over to the side of the table and I'm saying, these are my keepers. These are my throwers away. Phil, did you want to add anything else at this phase? This is the main selection table process.
I think you've covered very well probably the major thing to point out, and I think everybody sort of does this naturally, is you don't start with tasting and then go into looking at shape and color and the other things. You do the easy things first. And because first of all, that's easier for you to do. And also something like uniformity of shape or length is very critical to the grower and to the consumer if you're selling whole carrots. So do the easy things first. And like Micalea said, then you have to be cutting every carrot to really know where to go from there. Obviously, especially to taste it, but even just to do the color selection. Yeah, and as Micalea said, if you're running into if you're in a population, fairly large population, and getting consistently very poor flavor, it's maybe time to give up on it. You have to figure out what you're going to be balancing. To go in one direction or another, you need to have that minimum number in order to maintain the diversity of the population. So you kind of have to have a target in mind as you're going into this, of course. And I guess the other thing with the larger scale tasting is sometimes there is certainly something of a fatigue that comes on with tasting carrots. Yeah, anybody that's tasted more than a few, and you have to figure out how you might want to deal with that. If you're running into strong flavored turpentine tasting carrots, those are usually the ones to focus on getting rid of most quickly. And you may need to, if you've got a population that's earlier population, or let's say an old cultivar that hasn't been flavor evaluated before, and it may be pretty uniform looking, and you're trying to shape it up for color or for flavor and color, you might run into some really extreme flavors in there, and which case you want to have a sip of water. I found carbonated water. I don't necessarily drink much soda, but carbonated soda that's not sugar and no sugar in it, you don't want that. But typically carbonated water for me works pretty well. Everybody kind of has their own way to get rid of some of that turpentine flavor. And those are the same compounds as turpentine, just for the record. But you may want to have that in mind as you're doing a lot of flavor selection. If you want to really be careful, you can do your flavor selection and maybe select a little larger number than you think you might need, and then put those away and put them in the fridge and bring them out the next day and try again, or if you can talk somebody else in your team to try them and get a second test on them. So, but otherwise you covered it very well, Micalea. Thank you.
Any comments on the heritability of the flavors? I mean,
generally we find that bad flavor, the high turpentine flavor, is usually not showing up in crosses, in hybrids. If you're looking at an actual hybrid carrot, which you may well not be if you're not getting into the more complex system of using male sterility to make your carrot seed. So if you're looking at hybrid carrots, that harsh turpentine flavor is overcome by many of the milder, lower turpentine tasting ones. But it's not a simple trait. And the other thing is you're not only looking for that turpentineness, but also sweetness is the other variable. So the genetics is not particularly simple, but I would say that it's relatively easy to start breeding for better flavor if you have, maybe 20% of your population that's acceptable. That's maybe worth it to move ahead and say, hey, let's make a good flavored version of this old OP that you may want to resurrect or something like that.
And so there is an influence of environment on flavor, but from what I understand from you, you can be in a harsh environment or a good environment, and the good ones are still going to rise to the top.
Right, right. That's a great point. And my project is in Wisconsin, and we have warmer summers with hot nights. And it seems that warmer nights especially lead to a less favorable flavor, more turpentine and less sugar. And from a breeding program, to some extent, you want to have less than the optimal conditions, because your growers may not be growing your product in the optimal conditions only. So it don't feel too bad as long as you get, if you're harder on the carrot by growing it in less optimal conditions. And I would say the more stress the carrot that is experiencing, the poorer the flavor is. We don't know that these turpentine compounds are associated with something like disease resistance. There's no clear evidence of that. And certainly if you've got something like heat or cold or drought stress, you wouldn't expect those compounds to really have anything to do with accounting for the stress tolerance. But a happy growing carrot generally tastes a little better than one that's grown in more challenging conditions.
Thanks. Yeah, the one thing I would add here is that obviously, if you have particular diseases in your area, then both in the field and on the table, that's a time to really scrutinize selection criteria. Even if something looks really good, if it's getting hit with disease, then it may be not worth keeping it forward. Hugo?
Hi, yeah, I had a question in terms of, I imagine the harvesting and the tasting process takes a lot of time. And I'm wondering, how much time do you estimate or do you plan in terms of the quantities of carrots or trials that you're dealing with? And that was one first comment. And the second comment was about when you're tasting the carrots, you're spitting some of them out, right? And you need a sort of bucket, right? A recipient, taster needs a recipient to spit it out. And I think this is something we don't intuitively think about bringing, is just to make the tasting process easier. And I can definitely appreciate the fatigue that's involved. I'm very enthusiastic at the beginning, and after a few hours of harvesting and tasting, I want to do something else.
Yeah, so you can take it, Phil, but I can also comment on that. I was just going to say,
Go ahead.
everybody in the field and at the table, everybody has a pocket knife in their pocket at all times. You don't lose your pocket knife. So when you're tasting, you often, like, I would just pick up one of those the bottom half of the root, obviously. And another thing is, you don't wash the carrots before you store them. So even though you're tasting, we generally don't wash them. I just kind of rub the dirt off and taste them anyway. If you're particularly concerned, you can rinse off the bottom half of the root. That's not going to get saved anyway. But you don't really want to wash with water the whole steckling, because it'll affect the storability. But that just then take the knife and just take a very thin little sliver out of the cutting point of the root and then taste it. So it's not a big piece. I'm not biting off the whole carrot. And I don't generally spit unless it tastes so bad that I think my stomach's going to hurt. So you're just eating a lot of really small bites of carrots, like eating a giant carrot salad. And if you do have a lot to select, as Phil was saying, we're going to go to the next slide in a minute and I'll show you, but you can take, you could, if you had not cut them open yet and you're getting fatigue, you could taste half the population and then put them all in a brown paper bag, put them in the refrigerator, and wait till tomorrow to finish your tasting. Chris, did you have a comment?
Two unrelated. One, just to follow up on one thing you said, we have been giving our carrots a wash for most of our stuff and not finding it affects storability that much. And part of it is washing them just reveals so much more about the texture and all these little things that I can't see with the soil on them. So yeah, we definitely don't put them into a root washer, but definitely just giving them a spray down and done pretty good with that. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on was, or comment/question, when you get to that final that final selection and you're taking the last ones out, it seems to me that's also the point. I recall both of you doing this, going, I'm seeing other stuff in here I like, and then you might create another population from that final stuff.
Yeah, so something like root shape can be quite variable, and you may find some blunt carrots and some more pointy imperator types, and other shapes anyway showing up in some of these populations. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with starting different subpopulations and just keeping them straight. You usually can do that quite effectively. I see there's somebody, Hugo, it's something about brushing the carrots with a brush to clean them up. That works too. To go back to washing or not washing, we've tried it both ways, and just because it's quicker, I don't wash them. But if they are washed, we haven't seen much of a problem with storage, especially if you don't dunk the whole carrot. You don't want to dunk that crown of the carrots in a bucket of water, because then you've got all that water you're putting into storage, and that's an invitation for post-harvest storage problems. But washing the surface off and then tasting them isn't a bad thing to do. It's just, personally, I don't tend to do it. But I usually just cut a coin maybe as thick as three $quarter or something like that, half a centimeter thick, so.
May I ask, may I add a comment here about washing the carrots? I think, according to my observation at UBC, when we harvest the roots, it's much muddier because there's a lot of rain. So when we harvest them, it's very muddy, so they get a lot of mud on the roots. That's why we kind of had to wash them. But at El Centro, it's very dry, nice weather, so it's much easier to clean the roots. I think that's the difference.
Yeah, good point. And if it's already wet and muddy, you're not really making it worse, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll comment in a minute here about a little more of the storage. I think the key there is to make sure that when they go into storage, that they're not just soaking wet in a plastic bag, that they're gonna rot.
Right. Yeah, you can leave a carrot sitting on the table half a day. If it's a carrot of the size we're looking at, it's usually not going to be much of a problem. You don't necessarily want to do that, but you can get away with that. You do want to get it out of the field if it's a hot day, though, and put it in the cool and cool it down, though.
Next slide.
Sure, I just noticed Sarah's got her hand up as well there.
Oh, I can't see everyone.
For whatever reason, I cannot pin Sarah's face. So Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, it might just be because I have my video off. Yeah, I just was wondering if when you make that initial cut to cut the tip off and look at the cores, do you have to be careful to sterilize in between each root?
We do not at all. If you sense anything disease-wise in your carrots, you may want to, in addition to some water to drink and a bucket to expectorate into, if you do that, if you spit it out. But one way to, if you do see some disease, some cavity spot or some kind of storage disease showing up, you may need actually a small container of rubbing alcohol or something like that to dip the knife in to clean it off periodically. Otherwise, we typically do not clean the knife as we move along unless we're seeing storage problems.
So once we have the stecklings selected that we're going to then take for seed, then we then prepare them for storage for the vernalization phase. And sorry, I couldn't find great photos of it, but you can visualize this with me. We generally would take, so in this case, if the middle slide was all of those were the ones I was keeping, I would discard the tip half. Obviously, they're not going to do anything for you. Keep the top half of the roots, and then we put them into paper bags because the paper bag will absorb some of that extra moisture and also breathe. And if it's particularly wet, like what was it, 2020, that was horribly wet. El Centro, we then sometimes we'll just stuff some paper towels down in there to get them a little bit more dry. And then when we are ready to put them into longer term storage, because they're going to stay in the cooler for months on end, or 45 days at least, if you're lucky, if you have a shorter, if you're able to select late enough in the season. What we do is we then put them into a paper bag with some cedar shavings, a handful of cedar shavings you get just from a pet store, from like a hamster shavings cage. And we just put a handful in there, and that cedar, it absorbs the extra moisture, and it also has a slightly, antimicrobial effect in the bag to keep them from going bad in storage as quickly. Having said that, once you store them with cedar shavings, you're not going to want to taste them again. So if you haven't tasted yet, don't do that yet. But then that paper bag with the shavings, then they all get packed together and then put into the cooler for a minimum of 45 days. But in your climate, you're probably storing them for, Weijia can tell me, but for several months at a time before you're ready to replant them in the spring. During that time, we will go in maybe once a month, depending on how many roots you have. If you don't have the capacity to do this, it might not happen. If you have a huge breeding program like Phil's, I doubt that you do all of this. But if you're on the scale that you're operating, and the scale of the stecklings that we're preparing to replant, we go in once a month, open them up and take a look at them. And you might want to leave more than that 50 roots to go into storage, because in the winter, you're going to lose some roots to storage rot. It's just inevitable. And it's very, there you go. Oh, shoot. Yeah, for sure. So anyway, during the winter, we'll open them up, pull out some of those that aren't looking good, and then put the rest back in so that you're getting the disease component back out of the bag. You don't just have rotting carrots creating more rotting carrots. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. And I did not have a good field steckling planting. This is a silly photo someone took on the beach, but when you do get ready to go plant them out in the spring, after you have gone through your winter of vernalization, then you plant the stecklings in the ground with just that crown peeking out of the soil and the stecklings still growing out of the top. And then we grow ours in isolation tents in the summertime. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll move to the next slide. And Phil, I'll let you speak a little bit about the colors and inheritance of colors and nutrition. But I know we only have about 20 minutes left in the webinar. So we've kind of gone deep dive into the selection process. And I think Weijia is going to share a little bit more about the CANOVI results too. So I'm going to pass it on to you.
Okay. So when we look at these 5 carrots in the picture, 4 of them have pigments in them. The one on the left have no pigments or minimal amount of pigments. That's I heard someone was talking about growing white carrots, and so that's the color of wild carrots as well. It's interesting to note that if you cross a white carrot with pretty much with the orange, red, or yellow colors, you're going to end up with a white hybrid from those. White is generally quite dominant to the other colors. Yellow is quite dominant to red and orange is dominant to red, which is in some ways seems a little bit backwards. Usually you think of presence of color as being dominant. By dominant, I mean that when you intercross, let's say, an orange carrot and a red carrot, or an orange carrot and a yellow carrot, orange by red is going to give you orange because orange is dominant. The crosses, orange by yellow is going to give you yellow carrots because yellow is generally dominant. So just in terms of intercrossing different carrots to get different colors, that also is important when you're thinking about seed production, because you have to think about how much distance to have between your seed production spots to make sure that that something like your white carrot doesn't have any pollen that's going to be moved to an adjacent field where somebody's growing or you're growing seed for orange carrots. So
and where's the purple in that lineup, Phil?
What's that?
The purple in that lineup.
Yeah, and so those colors I mentioned, orange, yellow, and red are one group of pigments, carotenoids. Then purple is a color that's a different set of pigments that you can add or not add crossing wise to any of these other 4 colors. So you can have carrots with purple and red, purple, yellow, purple, orange, or purple, white, just by crossing any carrot with purple onto, purple tends to be dominant. So if you're crossing that middle carrot with a yellow carrot on the right, the carrot you're going to get is going to be yellow, but with a purple outer ring to it. Because again, purple is dominant when you make an intercross, whereas yellow is dominant looking at the orange versus yellow versus red colors. So the rules are fairly straightforward, but not exactly working as the general rules of thumb. And you just want to make sure that you're quite careful in making a uniform selection for color for whatever you're looking for, just because the grower and the consumer are looking for uniform color.
Thank you. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And if folks have questions, you could start putting those in chat. And I think we're going to go ahead and hand it back over to Chris and Weijia. But we can also answer questions in chat for the sake of time and have hopefully some discussion at the end.
Sure. I will just quickly go through my slides. One of our growers mentioned they want to learn about some common diseases that can affect the selection. So I put 3 very common diseases on this slide. So the first one is the alternaria leaf blight. You can tell the symptom from the leaves. And then another disease is the cavity spot that we have been seeing from our carrots. So I put a picture here for that one. And also another disease that we have seen on our carrots is the root knot nematodes. So for us, when we see these diseases, we take the carrots out. We just don't include them in our selection. Next slide, please. So this year, this is just a quick review of what we're doing this year for CANOVI. We have in total 10 farm sites across Canada participating in this year's trials. I sent out the seeds to all the sites at early season. So some of them are choosing to do communal selection, and some are doing individual, or some are doing both. So for those who choose to do communal selection, we ask them to send the roots back to UBC. So we will do storage and vernalization at UBC. And then when it's July or in early January, we take the roots out and do a further selection, because as Micalea mentioned, there might be some rot happened during the storage. So we'll do a further selection. And due to the capacity, limited capacity at UBC, we will reduce the number. So we're asking each participant site to send 50 roots to us, but then we will make a further selection and reduce that to, we'll combine all of them and just have 1 cage for orange and 2 cages for the multicolored population. That's our plan. And then with that, we will do seed production. And when we have the seeds, we're planning to send them back to our growers to do further trial and evaluation and further selection. Next slide, please. So these are the varieties that we are using this year. For the orange population set, we have CANOVI Orange, which is the breeding line that have been developed by CANOVI program at UBC. It has been selected for several generations now. And another variety is CIOA Orange Flavor Select. This one has been selected similarly as how we selected for CANOVI Orange, but also specifically selected for flavor. This one is being provided by the CIOA program. And another orange line is the F7119B. This one was selected from Phil's breeding program that when I went to El Centro earlier this year, I saw this one. It has all the characteristics that we like, the shape, the color, and also it has a good uniformity. That's why I picked this one and kind of wanted to add more like other genetic background into our orange population. And for the multicolor population, we have the Fantasia, which is the one that we have been including in our previous trials. So, and it has been liked by our growers. And another one is the OSA Sunsets. This one, because we know that our growers are interested in the multicolor population. And when I saw OSA Sunset, I thought it has a really beautiful color. And I think it would be nice to include in our multicolored population. So OSA has been very generously sharing their seeds with us. So these are the 2 populations. So basically we have orange population and the multicolored population. Some sites are doing both, but some sites are only doing one of them. Next slide, please. So these are the general goals of our selection for this year, and also like through the past years. These have been the major goals that we have been selecting our carrots for. On the left is for the orange carrots. We have been selecting them for the nut shape, and of course the taste, the flavor, and also the deep orange color. And also we select them for good storage ability and the ability to grow well for roots and the seeds. For the multicolor carrots population, we just want it to be more experimental, so you can select whatever you want. And so, but we do want you to tell us what you have been selecting for, so we have that record. And so yeah, so we know that's what you like and what you want to select for. So on next slide, Chris is going to talk about the form that we have gave you to write down what are the goals, what have you selected your carrots for. Chris, do you want to take over from here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're looking at two aspects of selection. One is actually doing the physical selection, like Micalea and Phil talked about. And then the other thing is documenting that selection. When we have carrots coming to us, it's going to be really useful for us to know that you've done very intentional selection. We've given parameters for the CANOVI cross carrot in terms of having a nonce shape, deep orange color, nice taste. And then you might also be, as Micalea talked about, looking at things like root smoothness, the shape of the shoulders, things like that. So making sure that stuff is all documented, especially if you're going above and beyond and doing some extra selection on things maybe that we haven't noticed ourselves. That might include core color, side roots. There's so many things you can select for. So here you can see there's sort of 5 selection goals, but you could make notes about a number of things. And then I think there's 2 things to consider here as well. There's with the CANOVI carrots selecting, so we're all selecting for the same goals, the shape, the color, and the taste. But if you're going to be planting out carrots on your own farm for your own population, you could choose some totally different selection criteria. If you want forked roots and really rough outsides and like divots in your crowns, you go ahead and select for those things. Probably you're not going to, but you may find there's a shape or a characteristic in enough of your population that you could create another population that is not meeting our overall selection goals for the communal roots, but might be something you can do on your farm. And making those notes for yourself so you remember what you selected for is going to be important for continuing to select for those traits over time. Because as much as you think you might remember what you selected for, you will not. So the documentation is really, really important in that aspect. Do you want add anything to that, Weijia?
That sounds good to me. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. So next slide, please. And here, Micalea actually covered quite a bit of this as well. And we did put together actually a little video about how we prepare our roots here for evaluation and for storage. So that'll go out. So same things. This is in the protocol document as well as in the video. We do the same thing as Micalea with the brown paper bag and the wood shavings. One thing we do after that is put that into a plastic bag that helps trap some of that moisture in there. And yeah, every month we pull that out and take a look at those. If there's any rotting carrots, we will pull them out. If we find it's a little too moist, what we might do is put a little bit more wood shavings in there. And if we were to find it was a little too dry, we might have a spray ball and just spritz a tiny bit of water in there for more moisture. So generally they're pretty good. There's only ever been adjustments a few times. So how you store them and how you ship them, I think can be pretty much the same. But when you ship them, padding them with newspaper or crumpled up craft paper is going to make sure that they ship with less likelihood of getting damaged. So that's going to be important. And then storage conditions, if you've got a walk-in cooler, into the walk-in cooler, between 3 and 4 degrees Celsius. Well, it's the Canadian audience, so I'm not going to do the conversion. It's going to be high humidity. And yeah, you don't want a lot of condensation in those bags because the extra moisture will cause things to degrade. But generally the wood chips and the paper do help mitigate that. Micalea, Phil, anything to add there? We good?
Say if you see any condensation on top of that plastic bag when you're looking at them from above, that's a good sign that you've got some moisture that you want to be getting rid of. Likewise, if the paper bag is wet, it's soaking wet, and you want to keep them, you want to dry those down especially, but you covered it well though, Chris, thank you.
The only thing I would add, moving backward a little bit, is that the Fantasia is truly a very wide genetic diversity mix. It's not a stable variety. So as you're selecting it, it can be selected some different directions, but also if you want to keep it as a sort of rainbow carrot look, then I would recommend selecting toward the more recessive colors rather than the dominant, to keep it kind of moving toward maintaining, not losing some of those recessive traits of having a little orange or the reds coming out of the colors.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was basically it, just for the basics of CANOVI, and just giving everyone any tips to help them with the process as they need. But yeah, we just wanted to check in with the growers that are here about how their carrots are doing. Were there any factors in your fields that you may need troubleshooting with or want advice on? And yeah, like, especially like, because Catherine, Patrice, like, you're here, do you have any questions or things you want to chat about?
Well, I just, it was good that I listened, because yeah, it will be helpful to select mainly. I understand I will avoid selecting too many purples in Fantasia. I will get them anyway if I reach for the middle toned tints. And so that's great. Yeah, we'll be selecting for, by the way, because I can see it's very different for us. We have a 5 to 6 month storage because of our very short summer. So, but surprisingly, we don't have a lot of storage kills. I mean, most of our carrots go through 5 to 6 months very well. So we do plant only the firmest specimens, but I do go through the tedious work of putting them back into potting soil before we store them, so that they grow rootlets during storage. So maybe that helps. So
yeah, just for clarification, Patrice, I wouldn't totally lose the purples, because like Phil was saying, that purple is a different pigment, and it has a lovely way of combining with the other colors. So if you go totally toward the recessive, you'll lose the dominant, because
no, I will keep a bit of them, but
yeah, find the balance.
I won't get overly excited about them, because I am.
or it is a great breeding population. You can take the purples off in another direction.
Yeah, it's cool. But I already have that purple and white Portuguese carrot, so we'll try to do like a good rainbow. I'm excited about this.
I might add another comment about storage and the tops. I think both Micalea, in the video I did, and Micalea here talked about sort of leaving about 1 inch or 2 centimeters on the top. And so you're not damaging the growing tip. But if you've taken a look at some of the seed growing guides, like the OSA one, they talk about, trimming the top to this kind of point. And in that case, you're really making sure you keep the apical meristem there, and you're taking off a good majority of the leaf and stem and whatnot. And I was thinking that might be a good thing to do. So I don't do that because it's really time consuming. You've got to get in there for each one, and you can do it pretty quick when you've got a lot of roots to go through. But I think if growers were having trouble in storage, if they were finding that the tops that were there are tending to rot or get issues, then going through that extra effort of that trimming might be worth it. My experience is, we just haven't had any issues, so we haven't bothered with that. But I think if I was to see a lot of rotting there, I would probably try to trim those down a lot better. And in the OSA seed production guide for carrots, they've got some really nice pictures in there about what that should look like in the end as well.
Yeah, that's I guess a great point to end on.
Can I add one more quick comment? I know we'll be harvesting our carrots here fairly soon. We do a lot of photo documenting, and we can even do some video. So if people have some requests about things to see, maybe we can do some specific photos or videos of that as well. If that's helpful, I think folks have a good amount of experience with this, but I know sometimes it really helps to see things. So yeah, we could also try to do some short videos to share with people as well.